I'm Aura, and I'm the host of Collective Mind, and I think there's some other people around, but I'm not totally sure. And this is going to be a bit of a different video because we have a way that we have used to help keep track of and organize our system to an extent is using a version of a system map, which you might have heard of system maps before. Ours is mostly keeping track of splits and fusions and that type of thing, and subsystems, and just kind of organizing the alters within our system into those groups to keep better track of. And we have seen a lot of people do this on paper, but we are not very artistic in that way, and we found a mind map type tool, a digital tool, that we use to kind of structure this. So we are a polyfragmented system, we have a lot of alters. So this is going to be potentially a little bit confusing. I'm hoping it's not too confusing. But it's also only a snapshot of some of the alters within some of the categories that exist in our system. And it's mostly the ones that I have the best communication with because I have done the most of this with just some input from some other people. But also because anybody who doesn't want me to know about them won't put their information on something like this or let anyone else put their information on something like this. So, Jaden and some other protectors and our gatekeepers and stuff like that know a lot more about a lot more alters than I do. But this covers just kind of a general overview of a lot of the alters that I know about, basically. So here's the first one of just kind of the general organization in the main area of our inner world, or the ones I have the most contact with. So the people in this first section, we don't consider them to be a part of a subsystem, and they're just kind of generally in the main area of our inner world, relatively close to front. And they are people I know about. So this is a long section, and I'm not going to go over everybody on these lists. That would make this take forever. But this list is a lot of littles and middles, and a lot of people who you won't have seen on this channel, who you might someday see on the channel, and some of them you will probably never see on the channel. But this was just kind of the general, I went through our plural kit list and kind of organized the people who were already on plural kit for our system into these different categories to help me keep track of which group they belong to, that kind of thing. So that's kind of the main area. And then we have our 4 core subsystems, and then the wolf pack, which we have a whole video introducing the wolf pack subsystem, so I'm not going to go into that one really at all because we already have a video going way more into detail anyway. But you haven't heard a lot about the core subsystems yet in our system. The most we've talked about them is probably in our video about how we learned about our subsystems, but the music core subsystem is the one that I'm a part of. I'm the host of the music core subsystem, as you can see from my description and everything. And then there are a few other people. Most of them you wouldn't have met. I think Pup was very briefly in a video. Michelle has done a video. Naya has done a video, I think. And obviously I've done a lot of videos. And there are a lot of other alters in the music core subsystem, but some of them weren't comfortable with their name being shared, and I don't know a lot of their names, so they wouldn't be on this list. And then the elemental core subsystem is the one that Anna is the host of, so Anna and Lex are both in that subsystem, as well as other people you haven't met. Is anybody else in that subsystem that you would have met? No one else is coming to mind? I don't think you've met anyone else from that subsystem, but the elemental core subsystem split like from our childhood host. So Anna, before all of the splits, still used the same name, and then she had a lot of splits kind of all at once, which in a video coming out very soon probably, I'm hoping it's going to be the next video if everything goes according to plan, we're going to talk about some of the major like system events where a lot changed all at once for our system personally. But one of those was Anna splitting into her subsystem and not being host anymore. But yeah, that's where the elemental core subsystem comes from. And then dark core you would know a little bit more about too, because Jade has talked about it some, and Kit actually in her Meet the Alters video recently talked about that some as well. Don't think you would have met anybody else from dark core. Oh, except Snake, who isn't on here for some reason. Oops. Maybe I wasn't sure yet if she would be comfortable with that. But here, I'll add her on there. Yeah, so you've met a couple of people from dark core. Dark core I'm gonna talk about more in a little bit. I have a whole separate map going into more detail about dark core. But they split from our original trauma holder. And then light core is the one we've talked about the least by far. But it is the subsystem that formed around our original caretaker. And Rachel is still considered the host of the light core subsystem. No one from that subsystem has been on our channel. There has been some change in that subsystem fairly recently. Rachel was dormant for a while, and some other changes that we'll probably go into at some point, but not quite yet. But that subsystem is also full of alters who for the most part work internally and don't front very often anyway, so we haven't really talked about that as much. But that's kind of the core subsystem overview, and we have a lot of other subsystems too, but I know a lot less about those subsystems and the alters who are in them, generally speaking. We have a couple subsystems that revolve mostly around like fictives from the same source type thing, but again, I know a lot less about them, so I can't really talk about them as much. Anna, I think, is really close. Like, really, really close. I don't know why. But I am gonna pull up the other map. So this is the one that I think is a little bit more confusing, because while I generally know the most about splits and things like that that have happened in the dark core subsystem, there have been a lot of splits, and some of them are complicated, and a lot of them involved an alter keeping the same name after splitting and stuff like that. So it gets a little bit complicated. But I'm going to start on the simpler side of things and then kind of work up from there, and I'll try to explain it best I can as I go along. But there have been a lot of fragments generally that I didn't try to put on here because there are a lot of them. I don't know for sure which ones split from dark core generally and which ones and like who they split from. Like, I don't know as much about those like relationships between alters, and a lot of them were less comfortable sharing any information about themselves, and I don't know a lot of their names, etc., etc. So I just kind of generally put that there are a lot of other splits that aren't on here. But then the like original core trauma holder split into two alters who have since done a lot of splitting. One of them was Michael, who you would have heard mentioned on our channel before because Michael and Natalie fused into Jaden, but this was an earlier version of Michael. This version of Michael was the one who was a part of that fusion. But Michael and the other alter whose name we're not sharing were the ones who, like, originally, as far as we can tell, split from that first trauma holder. It was one of the earliest splits like that in our system to deal with like different categories of trauma, basically. And Michael originally split after that into like the next version of Michael, and then someone else who's not comfortable with their name being on here. But this is a different alter than this one. It's a different name, but neither of them were comfortable sharing. So there was that split, and then Michael again split into Michael and Joseph, and then Joseph split into Joseph and Virgil. But this version of Michael was the one who fused. So hopefully that's not super confusing, because it's about to get more confusing than that. And a lot of other systems would probably have a lot more straightforward versions of this, but this is why it's so helpful for me to like organize it in some way visually that I can look at, is so that I can reference and be like, wait a second, who did that person split from again? How is this person related to this one? Because it's a lot. But that other original anonymous alter split originally into another one using the same name and Primal. And you might have heard the name Primal before, because Primal is one of the alters who fused into the version of Jade who exists now. But Primal had been around in some iteration or another for a very long time. So that was a major fusion when that happened, and that was still fairly recently. It wasn't that long before our channel started, like a couple months or something before our channel started, that fusion happened. But then sticking up here, first of all, that anonymous alter then split into Jade, Snake, and Kit around the same time. It's not totally clear, at least to me, if that split happened all at once or just close enough together that we're not sure which happened first or that type of thing. But this was the point where Jade chose that name, and someone who split from that first version of Jade has used the name Jade ever since. That's like the simplest way I can put that, I think. But Jade then split into Jade and Natalie, and then Jade split into Jade and Morgan split into Morgan and Nyx, approximately. Nyx is technically it's so confusing. So Nyx kind of formed with a piece that split off from Morgan and a piece that split off from Primal. Kind of like fused instantly, if you want to think about it that way, into Nyx. It's the simplest way I can put it. I know this is a lot, I'm sorry. But then if I go down to Primal section, can you see all of it yet? Almost. Okay. So this original version of Primal split into Primal and Kitty, and then Kitty much later split into Kitty and Lucy, and then Kitty fused with Jade. But then if I go up here, I am also going to point out, before I forget, that if some of these splits are familiar from the video where Jade talked about parenting and talked about her cubs, some of these splits are the ones that became her cubs. So some of them were considered either Jade or Primal's cubs like immediately, and some of them kind of started being considered that later. It just depends which one, and I'm not going to get into that in too much detail right now, but let's see. Oh, I might have not said that right before. That original version of Primal split into Primal, Mama Bear, and Kitty at pretty much the same time. Close enough to the same time that we're not sure which one happened first, or if they were literally at the same time. And then Mama Bear split into Mama Bear and Barry. And Primal split into Primal and Shadow. And Shadow you might have seen, I think, in a live stream or two. But she hasn't done anything else yet on the channel, I don't think. And then Primal again split into Primal and Ember, and then Primal again split into Primal and Nox, and then that final version of Primal was who fused with Jade to end up overall with the version of Jade we have now, and this version of Mama Bear was the one who was a part of that fusion too. So this was a multi-step fusion, if you aren't familiar with us having talked about this before. I'm basically certain that Jade talked about it in her Meet the Altars video. All of the parts of it except Kitty, but Jade and Primal fused together first, and then kept using the name Jade. And then that new version of Jade fused with Mama Bear, kept using the name Jade, and then later fused with Kitty and still uses the name Jade. So that's the simplest way I can put that, I think. And I hope this generally is interesting to some of you at least, but it is completely okay if it's too complicated or not interesting or whatever. It's completely okay if it goes totally over your head or in one ear and out the other, or however you want to look at it. You definitely don't need to keep track of all of these intricate details of our system, but if any of them are interesting to you, that's like some more tidbits that I can share. So maybe it fills in some gaps of things that you might have been curious about. But if not, that's fine. And if there are things that were super confusing that you have questions about, feel free to ask us. If there are specific altars you have questions about, that'll be a case-by-case basis of how much we share based on what they're comfortable with. But you can still feel free to ask, as always, as long as it's respectful and you don't push us if we say no. So that's generally our position on that, is you can ask us questions and it's our responsibility to share only what we're comfortable sharing. But yeah, I hope you liked this video and that it was interesting to some extent at least. it's helpful for me to make these, but if it's not at all helpful in explaining anything to you, totally understandable. But if it is, let me know, and then if I have maps like this in the future for other subsystems and stuff like that, maybe we'll share some of those too. Just let us know. And thank you as always to our patrons over on Patreon. If you want to go check out our Patreon, there is a link in the description along with our Discord and our Etsy shop. And all of those things are fun things to check out. And I hope you'll like the video and subscribe if you haven't already, and ring the bell so you don't miss any future videos. And yeah, I'll also put videos on the screen that are related in some way that you can click on if you're interested. So yeah, I think that's it. So thank you so much for watching. Bye!